Greetings, festive greetings, and welcome once again to another door on the TooFatLardies Advent Calendar for 2021. Are you getting excited about Christmas? I am. In fact, you could say I'm building up quite a fervour. Fervour, of course, is one of those things that you might come across in the TooFatLardies wargame. And here is Richard, who's going to tell us where his inspiration for fervour comes from. Richard, we're all ears.
In the very first window of this Advent calendar, Nick talked about the genesis of the system of wounds, which went on to become the shock element that's included in pretty much every rule set that we've produced. I talked in my last window about how, as a game designer, it's my job to think hard about how to reflect the particular nuances of warfare in an historical period, but how reinventing the wheel is not always the best approach. Indeed, what I hope has come across throughout this whole Advent calendar series is how much of game design is an ongoing journey. I'd go so far as to say that no set of rules is ever perfect. I always find myself looking back and thinking of something that I'd do slightly differently were I to design that particular game again. For the most part, this is because my experience is that designing games is an evolutionary process, the next step being informed by the one that's already just happened. And the journey continues with a perfect vision of where you've come from, but no idea how the path that you're walking down may twist and turn ahead of you, and absolutely clueless as to where the path will take you eventually. Indeed, I think it's a journey which undoubtedly has no end, other than me falling off the perch at some point, which you'll know about, and I hopefully won't. Well, this journey of evolution can be seen in several areas of what we've done over the years. I mean, certainly in the development of the card hand management system, which I talked about behind window 14. But it also applies across the piece. Warlords in Infamy, with their ability to add more combat dice, but by exposing themselves to greater risk, is another example. It takes the concept of the big man or leader and doesn't reinvent it, but it adjusts it and adjusts what already exists to suit the nuances and particular style of the warfare that we're trying to reflect. Infamy also saw a new, in inverted commas, mechanism with the inclusion of fervour. It's the concept that was inspired by the classical accounts of the period, where the Roman historians and Greek historians, classical historians, give us a very Romano-centric view of their barbarian foes. But what's interesting is how they clearly see these wild, hairy men on their borders as not inferior, but just different. Tacitus makes a very sharp political point, contrasting the sense of honour found within the barbarian tribes in Germany with the political scheming that he sees in Rome. And there's a clear sense that while the Romans were horrified by the table manners and the sartorial styles of such tribes, they were also scared to death of them. Militarily, they did not automatically assume that a disciplined Roman force would defeat any bunch of hairy barbarians. They knew just how dangerous their opponents were, and they went out of their way to avoid situations where the advantage could be gifted to their foe. Publius Quintilius Varus proving the unfortunate exception rather than the rule. When creating Infamy, it was always my intent to use the classical sources as my main inspiration. Yes, I read acres of academic papers and books, but I always found myself returning to the classics. The message coming through loud and clear was all about asymmetrical warfare, where both sides had certain advantages and needed to play to their strengths in order to maximise their chances of winning. Now, for the Romans, that was obviously drill, and in many ways, the Roman drill manual, in game terms, resembles the type of flag-driven enhancements you get in sharp practice, slightly on steroids, but effectively step out, crashing volley, all of those can find their equivalent in the Roman drill manual. For the barbarians, I wanted a mechanism which would reflect their very different approach to warfare, the sheer violence of their attacks. but also their fragility in an ongoing fight. And the answer to that was Fervour. Now, Fervour's not new. It's another classical example of the evolution of one idea. Its roots are clearly in the shock system. Shock and fervour are matter and antimatter, or possibly the polar opposites of two magnets, which are there opposing each other. Where shock reduces a unit's ability to move and fight, fervour enhances it. Now, as a game mechanism, Fervour has the advantage that if you as a player are familiar with the shock mechanism in most of our rules, you'll readily pick up Fervour. It's just the mirror image of it. In terms of its effect on the game, it's easy to track, and it does a job of representing the white heat of a barbarian attack, which then rapidly cools as combat reduces the enthusiasm of its participants. It's not predictable. It offers its commander no absolute certainties, and none indeed for its opposition either. As a Roman player, you must do all in your power to remove Fervour before the enemy makes contact. And when the enemy does make contact, you must minimise that damage at that point. And then, when you feel the balance of the fight shift in your favour, you've got to burst out and strike really hard. It's one of those mechanisms that, like shock, just does what it says on the tin. I feel that it goes a long way to make the barbarian forces just as scary as the Romans found them to be. Like the Boer War rules that we published in one of the specials many years ago and that Sydney so often blathers on about, the Roman experience in infamy is one of learning how to deal with an opponent who on first contact and with the right wind behind them can appear absolutely unbeatable. It's going through that often terrifying learning experience that really sheds light on what I feel War on the Frontiers must have felt like 2,000 years ago. As a game designer, I think it's the best game I've ever created, and I certainly think Fervour plays a large role in getting it to do what I wanted it to do.